right? I'm a big believer in ROI, and in business that usually means return on investment. But for me, it's return on impact. I know as long as I can serve the individuals who show up to listen, I will have a return in some way, shape, or form, whether that's from the inside or from the outside. That part doesn't matter, but there's always going to be some sort of return on the impact that I'm making. And that impact is my purpose, and that purpose brings me that happiness. And I think that's such a huge thing. And another thing that you said that was so smart was like, yeah, there's certain days that we're sad or angry or whatever. Most of my life, I thought that wasn't okay. To be sad or angry. I thought that I had to be happy all the time, or I was the worst person on the planet. And I actually had a coach at one point a number of years ago. She was a spiritual and relationship coach. And she's like, well, how are you feeling right now? I'm like, I'm angry. I used some coarse language, but for this, I'm angry, right? And she goes, you're allowed to be angry. You just can't be an a-hole. And that was a massive shift in my life. It was the first time anybody gave me permission to be anything but happy. And then I realized that anger or sadness or whatever emotion is fleeting. So I better sit in that feeling, understand why, and then let it go. And then it's a lot easier to move forward to the next thing and find gratitude again and find happiness again and fulfillment.
Hello and welcome to the Disrupt the Everyday podcast. We're here to help you navigate life while disrupting the status quo. Our discussions cover a number of topics relevant to everyday life. We discuss everything from relationships to entrepreneurship. We also engage in some difficult but important conversations. And now, here are your hosts, Brian and Tanya Hamilton.
Welcome to episode 30 of the Disrupt the Everyday podcast. Today we're joined by Justin Schenck, host of the Growth Now Movement podcast. Justin, thanks for joining us today.
Oh, thank you guys so much. I'm really honored to be here and excited to dive into some really awesome conversation.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Now, I guess we'll start off the way we always do, and that's by asking, who is Justin Schenck?
Yeah, this question's really funny. I have obviously answered it 10 million different ways because I don't necessarily like, it's so weird. Like people have titles for themselves and they live like that, like this is who I am. And honestly, who I am is just Justin, right? I'm just me, and I try and show up as my best self at any given time. Now, to answer the question in the manner in which you asked, I'm a podcaster, right? I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a speaker. And I've really been blessed with this entire path of podcasting. About 5.5 years ago, I started podcasting, not really sure what it was going to do for me. I had one idea in mind and it completely went in a different direction. I'm sure we'll get into that part of my story, but really who I am is a podcaster and a thought leader when it comes to fulfillment in your life. And how do you really find fulfillment when it comes to every single day life, right? Like we have this idea that we need to get somewhere. Like we have this massive goal. And once we get there, then we're going to be happy. And so what I like to talk about is like, how do we enjoy the moments that we have every single day as we go and chase our dreams? Because dreams and goals are important.
Absolutely. All right. So actually, can we just start off by following your journey? What was young Justin like? What was your life like then?
Yeah. So my life kind of took a crazy turn around 12 years old. So when I was 12, my parents got a divorce. At that point, I was really living that perfect life. Like my parents were successful, lived in a very big house in a perfect neighborhood. And they got divorced and made some bad personal choices. And literally overnight, it went from living in this big home with me and both my parents and both my sisters to my dad moved into a trailer and my mom moved into a 2-bedroom apartment. And it was this realization of like, wow, like there's these polar opposites in life. I talk to a lot of kids who, when they're being raised in like a lower income home, they don't know that they're in a lower income home because that's all they know. Well, I saw both of them. And so I was really, really at a young age, I became very self-aware of the things that I wanted in life versus the things that I didn't want in life. And that's actually probably the more powerful thing, are the things that I didn't want. And as life went on, I kind of skated through school, was never really the good student. And when I was 16, I found myself in high school with a 1.7 GPA. My mom at that point was in the middle of a 20-year opioid addiction, and my dad was in jail. And when you look at that, it literally means, like it says, all signs pointing to you've got no shot, right? Like literally no chance to become successful. As a matter of fact, the statistics state if your parent is an addict, you have a 50% chance of being an addict. And if your parent's in jail, you have a 50% chance of ending up in jail. Like if you do the math, I'm 100% screwed. Like I've got no hope. And so that's really where I found myself as a child, really trying to navigate life from a standpoint of, okay, what am I supposed to do with this? Right. Obviously, college wasn't part of the equation. I actually applied. I never really wanted to go to college. I applied to one college because my mom told me to. I applied to Temple University, and I was like, well, maybe I'll get in. My uncle was actually on the board at the time. And I still got waitlisted. So when your uncle's on the board and you get waitlisted to that college, like, that's not good. That's not a good thing. And so I ended up getting into a direct sales job and did very, very well. And that's really what opened my eyes to entrepreneurship, and then began my journey as an adult to really discover what am I here for? Like, what kind of impact am I here to make in the world?
So can I ask, going to now, how are the dynamics between you and your two sisters?
Oh, we're great. So my sister, obviously I'm the youngest, so I got everything I wanted. I was spoiled, and they were the older ones. So obviously when we're younger, you're going to fight, but now we're super close. They're two of my best friends, and we're able to really have a ton of fun together when we do get together. We live in separate states now, but I see them a couple of times a year, and we always have a good time. And so, I think going through those moments with them really created a bond that cannot be broken, right? Like living in a household where my parents fought to the point where they were throwing plates at each other, like crazy stuff. And, when we were able to kind of support each other at that young age, we didn't realize it until later, but now because of that, we have such a tight bond. And I just feel really blessed to have them, as my sisters. And my relationship with my father is really good too now, which is a blessing. And I was the best man at his wedding and all those other things. So, the family members that are left, and I'm sure we'll get into the mom part of the story, but, the family members that are left, we're all very close, and we're there to support each other and lift each other up and all those amazing things.
That's great.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, in terms of, and again, just kind of shifting back to some of the obstacles that you faced, we understand how now it impacted your relationship with your sisters. How did it impact you as a person? How did what you went through shape who Justin Schenck is today?
Yeah, man, I think it's everything, right? Like, everything that anybody, whoever they are as an adult, is really shaped as a child, right? But you also have seen those memes or heard the story of the two brothers whose father was an alcoholic, right? And the one grows up to be an alcoholic, and the other one never has a sip of alcohol and is very successful. And they asked them the question, why are you like this? And they both had the same answer, which is because my dad's an alcoholic. And I think the greatest gift I was given almost innately was being self-aware. And so I was really, really self-aware of the decisions and the choices I made, especially as a young man, to begin to navigate. Because again, that power of knowing what I didn't want, right? And so seeing those things, and again, my parents were great parents, so I was blessed with that, but they made really poor personal choices. And so being aware of, I don't want to go down that path, it shaped me in a way that it made me so self-aware that I made strategical choices to become better every single day. Did I get better every single day? No, I still don't get better every single day, but I certainly try. And I think when you're on that path of really focusing in on making an impact and really being vulnerable with who you are and stepping into that, that's going to create a great future, not only for yourself, but for other people as well. And so going through that stuff as a child is 100% the reason I'm here today, right? Because I was able to see the things I didn't want, which shaped my actions, which led to today.
Yeah, I was actually just thinking that. I'm like, you may not know right off the bat, when you're a teenager and you're going through all this in a home, what it is you want to do, where you want to end up, but you can figure out what it is you don't want to do. And then as soon as you know that, then you move forward, right? And I think that's where you get those success stories from people who have had those failures and, different things happen to them along the way. So
yeah, for sure. And honestly, like I didn't get totally clear on where I wanted to be until I was like 30. And so there's a lot of adult life there, where I was just trying different things. Right. And honestly, I was trying those things because I thought that's what society told me I should be. So one of my favorite questions is, who were you before the world told you who you should be? It's such a fascinating question to really sit alone and think about that. And I realized when I was 30 that I was just chasing what society told me I should be, right? The money, the cars, the quote unquote success, right? That's what I was chasing until I was 30. And then I hit my rock bottom moment. And that was really the change in my life to realize, wow, it's so much more, right? There's so much more to me than what society says I should be. And so, yeah, it really does begin with, what do I not want to be? I highly encourage everybody to try and fail and be miserable for a little bit in your own choices, because that's going to lead to your ultimate happiness. Because without sadness, there is no happiness, and vice versa. And so I think it's important to navigate and fail, and pick yourself up and try again.
Mm-hmm. Are you comfortable with sharing that rock bottom moment?
Oh yeah. So obviously I told you, I started this podcast 5.5 years ago. And the original idea behind the podcast was to interview entrepreneurs, again, chasing this idea that society says I need to be a successful entrepreneur. So I was going to interview successful entrepreneurs, because at this point I had 3 failed businesses that I had tried to launch, and some had moderate success and then quickly took a nosedive. I was like, let me interview these people, pick their brain, because I'm doing something wrong. And so let me learn from them, which is noble in its own right. But that was the original idea behind the podcast. And what happened was, 5 months before I launched the show, my mom passed away. She lost her battle to opioids. And it was in that moment, walking into the hospital room, and she was intubated in the bed, that I realized that life is so much more than some end goal, right? Because it can end in an instance. So if I were chasing something so massive, which I always put an asterisk, goals are very important. It gives you a direction, it gives you drive, it gives you all those things. But people chase them to get that happiness part of it, right? And I was chasing it in hopes that one day I'd be happy. And I looked at my mom as she was taking her final breaths, and I realized that my mom didn't die from an addiction. My mom died because she didn't love herself, because she didn't think life could get any better. And so what ended up happening, being in that moment and witnessing it, the podcast organically took a route of having those types of rock bottom conversations with people, and really diving into their personal journey and their personal story of, hey, look, at least to the world, you present yourself as happy and successful. But it wasn't always like that. Like, you were in a part of a spot in your life where you thought you had to tap out, that you thought you had to give up, that you didn't think you could get any better. What made you snap out of that? Because there are too many people in this world that have addiction, or are sad, or don't think that they're enough, or don't think that they're worthy. And it's because they find themselves in this rock bottom moment. And the greatest lesson I've learned through my life is that we decide when our rock bottom moment is. And mine was when my mom passed away, because I had 2 choices right then and there: go down in a downward spiral, or make it an opportunity to get better for myself and other people. And if I went on that downward spiral, the next rock bottom moment, the next rock bottom moment, the next rock bottom moment. But if you make a conscious decision to say, this is it, and I'm going to do the things I have to do to get better, that's when life changes. When you make that conscious decision to say, this is my rock bottom moment. Now, have I had rough days and rough years and months since then? Of course, I really have. I mean, that's just the reality, but it's never a rock bottom moment, because there's always hope. There's always an opportunity. There's always that, I always say that life is happening for me and not to me, right? Everything's an opportunity. Everything is there for a lesson or a step in the right direction. And so I think that's the biggest takeaway from that rock bottom moment, is like, it can shift your life entirely. And if you look at what I do now with this podcast that now gets played in 100 countries every single week, I have my live events, I speak all over the country, all these cool things. I don't say that to impress anybody. I say that to impress upon people that if it weren't for that terrible moment in my life, none of this would be happening. And so life is truly happening for you. And you have to get out of that victim mindset of, oh, why me? Or woe is me? Why is this happening to me? And that was really that big mental shift for me in that moment, to say, this is it. This is the rock bottom moment.
Right. And actually, you bring up an interesting point there, because again, given the set of circumstances you had, although when you're going through it, it just seems like it's normal, but, you face a significant amount of challenges. You talk about, having a 1.7 GPA, you mentioned being waitlisted at the university where your uncle was a board member. Did you, and I'm sure you must have struggled with at times some self-limiting beliefs or self-doubt. And if that is the case, how did you overcome that?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. I think limiting beliefs are a reality for every single person on this planet all the time. Like, we all have limiting beliefs in some way, shape, or form, right? Like, I have friends that are billionaires who have limiting beliefs. Like, that's just the reality. And I've had and still have, limiting beliefs, obviously some bigger than others and some more important or more impactful in my life than others. But the limiting beliefs have actually been an interesting it's played an interesting role in my life and my success story. It's really held me back for many years as a young kid, because I had a money narrative, because my parents made bad money choices and then I didn't feel deserving of money, right? So that's the limiting belief that I had. And at times still have, right? Because you always want to get to that next level, but why can't I break through? But I talk a lot about the 4 pillars of life. And this is actually a lot of the basis of what I talk about when it comes to fulfillment, which is business, relationships, spirituality, and relationships. So when you take those 4 things, if we're able to focus in consistent growth on those 4 things and balance it out, that's where fulfillment comes from. It's never about that end goal, right? And so I looked at all 4 of these pillars. This is actually very recent. Like, I love sharing this story because it is such a recent thing. The end of 2020, I found myself, like most people, I succumbed to COVID, meaning I ate my face off. I drank my face off. I watched all the Netflix and I gained all the weight. And at the end of 2020, I was like, oh my gosh, I need to get this under control. But the thing was about my weight, this was a lifelong thing. Being physically fit was a lifelong battle for me. And I had to kind of go back and go, where is this coming from? Why can't I overcome this? Right? Like, I figured out my relationships, both romantically and business-wise and friendships, are phenomenal right now. My spirituality, I'm on a massive path right now to really break through a lot of those things that I need to, and business is good. Right. And so I was like, why can't I figure out this wellness piece? Right. If I'm calling it one of the 4 pillars, I really need to figure this out. And I looked back at my life, and I went back to when I was 12 years old. Also, that same time my parents were getting a divorce, and I broke my hip at that age. So I ended up breaking both my hips, but I broke the first one, which ended up leading to 5 surgeries. And I remember the doctor saying to me, he said to me and my parents, well, you'll never be an athlete. And that embedded into the back of my brain to go, okay, I'm never going to be fit. I'm never going to be able to run. I'm never going to be able to do burpees or whatever else you think about when it comes to fitness, right? And so this thing ingrained in the back of my brain and never came to the forefront. And I allowed that to control the narrative of my life. And so what happened, because I had that limiting belief, I'd start to get healthy, I'd lose weight, and then I'd self-sabotage because I had a narrative of, you could never be an athlete. And so I decided that I was going to break through this limiting belief for once and for all. And so I developed actually a 3-step process to overcome any limiting belief. And it's super simple, but not easy, right? It's actually very difficult, but it's super simple when you break it down. But the first thing is to get uncomfortable. And what I mean by that is commit to a challenge. Put yourself out there, do different things. And so what I decided to do was do 75 hard. And I committed not only to myself and to my girlfriend and to my friends, but also to my podcast. So I'm doing 75 hard. And if you don't know what that is, it's a 75-day challenge, which you do 2 45-minute workouts a day, 1 outside, 1 inside, no cheat meals, no alcohol, progress photo every day, 10 pages of a book, and a gallon of water every single day for 75 days straight. So I got uncomfortable and I said, okay, I'm going to do this thing that I was told I could never do. I mean, work out an hour and a half a day. You're crazy, right? Second part of this process is surround yourself with the right people. And my girlfriend decided she was going to do 75 hard with me. And I remember on day 1, we were headed out the door to do our first workout outside. And I go, babe, I'm an athlete. And her response was, yeah, you are. No hesitation, nothing. Right. So immediately I was like, okay, I'm surrounded by the right people, right? The people that are going to push you, but also lift you up at the same time. Those are the right people. And then step 3 is take action, because nothing works unless you do. And so I went through and I completed 75 hard, and I got in the best shape of my life. And I've worked out 4 to 6 days a week consistently since then, because the narrative is no longer, I'm that person who's lazy or can't work out or can't whatever. That's gone. And so I've been able to stick to working out and stay in moderate shape, because beer has been reintroduced. But stay in moderate shape and continue to work out regularly to keep myself healthy and keep myself well, which is super important now in today's world, of course, from a health standpoint. But I just feel really blessed to be like, okay, cool. Those 3 things I can literally copy and paste into any limiting belief that I have in my life. And it works, and you overcome it. And so that's what I recommend to anybody who have these limiting beliefs. Number 1, get uncomfortable. Do something that makes you uncomfortable. Number 2, make sure you're surrounded by the right people. And number 3, take action. And you will break through those limiting beliefs, as simple as that sounds.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, as I listen to your story, I feel there's a couple of similarities. Like, for me, there's a year when I was 10 years old where a lot of things happened. I think for you, it was 12. You had a lot of things happen in that same year. Like, for me, it was I had my oldest sibling actually was murdered that year.
Wow.
And the crazy part of that is at his funeral, I actually found out I grew up thinking he was my half brother until that point. Again, I was 10 years old at this time. And then I found out at his funeral that we actually weren't related. My dad had raised him because, my dad's other two kids were his half sibling. So I always just thought, like, all of us were half siblings. And then that same year, I also found out that I had a sister that I didn't know about until then. She was, my mom had her young, put her up for adoption. And then when she was 18, she found us. So like there's just so much change that happened in that year. And again, when I look at you when you were 12, you had both of your hips broken, and you said it was 5 surgeries, right?
Yeah, it ended up being 5 surgeries over the course of 3 years, but yeah.
But yeah, all prompted when you were 12. Everything that happened with your parents, it's just weird at some points in life. And I feel like, I've met a lot of people who have kind of had that same experience. There's one year that's just a really trying year. And again, like, you had a lot of things that just really happened within that time. Now, I guess looking back at that, actually, and I kind of actually, I want to move forward to where you are today. And I know there's a lot of people tuning in, probably because they followed your platform. A lot of people are, starting podcasts these days. What advice would you give to a new podcaster?
Yeah, that's a great question. Obviously, one thing that I do, and I didn't even mention this, I do own a podcast production coaching company. And so I help high level entrepreneurs and influencers launch their podcasts and their brand and so on and so forth. And, for me, there's so many tips I can give. There's so many things that you should do right in order to find the success. And, but the main thing that I would say to anybody is niche down into something that you're very, very passionate about. Right? Everybody wants to go super broad and like, they want to, I want to reach the masses. I want to do this. The reality is 80% of shows do less than 100 downloads an episode. And I don't say that to discourage anybody. I actually say that to encourage them to go, you can literally build 100 super fans or 100 people that you can impact in some way, shape, or form, which is more than most. Right. And I tell that to a lot of people because we're used to these fake social media numbers of 1 million followers and 10,000 views on a Facebook thing or whatever, Facebook video. Here's something crazy. Do you know what the average view of a Facebook video is?
Average view? I want to say it's, I know for YouTube, it's like 2 minutes. Facebook, I'm going to guess like 30 seconds.
8 seconds.
8 seconds. Okay.
So your average view of a Facebook video is 8 seconds long. Podcast listeners will listen to 80% of your show or more every single episode, right? So you're building great community through podcasts. And so what I would encourage somebody to do is niche down. Don't worry about the numbers. Niche down into something you're really, really passionate about, because podcasting is a long-term game. And so if you're in it for a short amount of time, you're never going to see the success. Like, I have people, no joke, I have clients who have millions of real followers, and they'll launch a podcast and they do like 1/10 of what their followers are per episode. And they're blown away. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. This is, number one, it's normal. Number two, these are your super fans. These are the people that are willing to go to the end of the earth and back for you. And so that's really what I would highly recommend anybody, without getting too technical or tactical, is before you start, really niche down and understand what it is and who it is you're serving. And once you can do that, then the rest becomes super easy, because it's easier to step up, get the interviews done, do the editing work, do the uploading, do all that stuff, because you know that you're serving a purpose.
Absolutely. Now, the other thing I kind of want to follow up with there is, you mentioned the numbers and not getting tied up in the numbers. Now, there's a story that I've heard you tell, and we were actually talking about it before we started off, of an individual who was listening to your podcast when the numbers were still really low. And you know which story I'm talking about. Could you share that with us?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought this up, because I think it's a really cool story, and it kind of shows that, even if you don't realize how much of an impact you're making, you actually are making a huge impact, even if it's 3 people that are watching. And so when I started the podcast, I had a co-host, and the show didn't do very well. And as we were going along, we were like 30 or 40 episodes in, and we were doing 30 to 60 downloads an episode, and like 40 to 60, right in that range. And once in a blue moon, we get an episode that would spike or whatever, right? But it was really nothing. And then one day, out of nowhere, somebody from Japan sent me a message on Facebook, actually, And he said, because of your show, I decided not to take my life. And it was in that moment that I realized, even if there's one person listening, I'm showing up, because we all have a duty in this world to make some sort of impact. It doesn't have to be grand. And the impact it can even be for yourself, right? It doesn't need to be for anybody else, but we all have a duty to show up and be our best self at any given moment. And it was in that moment that I realized that even if one person listens, I'm going to show up the best that I can. And so now, I mean, actually about a handful of people have reached out and said similar things to me. And it means so much to be like, okay, that's why I'm here. That's why I'm doing this work. That's why I'm continuing to push through. But, impact can happen on a small scale. You might post something on Facebook today, a meme or on Instagram today that somebody sees it. They might not even like it, but it changes the trajectory of their entire day in a positive or negative way, by the way. You can make a very negative impact as well. So we have to be cognizant and aware of the things that we're saying, because people are paying attention, even when you don't know that they are.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing too, I kind of want to give you some kudos for. I know you had something posted on Instagram that, Tanya had asked you a question about podcasting and you responded. So first of all, she thought that was pretty cool. It was around the amount of time that you actually spend podcasting. And again, it's a time commitment for anybody who's thinking about it. So just, take that into account. And another thing that we wanted to ask you is just in terms of growth, what are some of the things that you've done to kind of grow that organic audience?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. It's really a bunch of different things that you can do, but I'll tell you the most impactful thing you can do. And that is to be a guest on somebody else's show. And that's the thing that people don't realize. Like, you'll notice at the end of this, I'll have 3 things that I'm pitching. Not pitching, but you'll say, where do people find you? There's 3 things that I say. Number 1 is I go, wherever you're listening to the show, if you like what I've had to say, go search the Growth Now movement and find me. That's really the only thing that matters. Because people are always like, well, where do podcast listeners hang out? It's such this crazy thing because it's all on separate platforms. It's not connected to Facebook or Instagram and all this crazy stuff. Well, guess what? Podcast listeners are listening to podcasts that are like yours. And so the number 1 tip is to become a guest on other shows. Openly share your story. Tell a true story of who you are, and where you're going and who you want to serve. And they'll find you that way. I mean, that's probably the number 1 way. There's a bunch of other things, like make sure your branding is good and make sure your social media posts make sense. And, when I don't post every week anymore about the shows that come out because my audience is pretty solidified at this point. But one thing I'll say, if you're posting on social media about the show, don't just shout saying you have a new podcast episode out. People don't care. That's the one thing I've realized. I actually spoke at PodFest a number of years ago. I had the number 1 breakout. This is actually, you probably know this story too. But I had the number 1 breakout at PodFest, which was really, really cool. And I feel honored. But the first thing I said is the podcasters are the most selfish people in the world. And I didn't mean it as an insult. I just meant it as like, if you're shouting from the rooftops that you have a new podcast episode or whatever, people are just going to roll their eyes and move forward. And so what I do, or what I did when I posted regularly about the episodes, I would essentially do what I call a hook. And it's usually a question or multiple questions that relate to the episode. Say I do an episode, I don't even know why this is always the example, but say I do an episode on divorce. I've never been married. So, but say I do an episode on divorce, I would go, having a rough time in your marriage? Are you thinking about divorce? Or are you recently divorced and you're having issues with blank? Well, in this episode, we address this, this, and this. Go check it out. So it might not speak to everybody, but that episode will speak to whoever that person is. So I call it the hook, right? And so I would say those are 2 good ways to do it. Being a guest on other shows, because that's where the audience is, and then hooking by asking the right questions under the thing that you have the answers to in that podcast. And you really kind of bring them in and go, oh yeah, I struggle with that. Oh yeah, well, I feel like I've been sad lately. Like, why? Of course I should listen to this episode, right? Like, one of my most popular episodes was The Secret to Unlocking Happiness. And that was just the title. And I realized how much people are hurting in that moment, right? And so if you can ask the right questions, you're going to be able to serve so many more people.
Yeah, that's interesting because that's Brian's He's really good at doing that. He's always good. He'll be like, oh, we need a question for this. And I'll throw out a whole bunch and he's like, yeah. And then usually he ends up going with the one he had anyways, or we, mix them up. But
Yeah, I love it.
So a question about Instagram. We're following you on Instagram and I'm more the social media person. So a few weeks ago, I think you had posted about your 3 ways to fulfillment. So I know we talked a little bit about that at the beginning, but can you unpack those 3 that you were talking about? You may not remember, and that's okay.
I don't remember them. So yeah, and the reason I don't remember them is because there's more than 3 ways. They just happen to be the 3 things that I mentioned in the post. I'll look it up right now as we talk, and I'll unpack them. So I'm gonna do that.
It was
for
from
you.
August 13th.
I got it. So obviously the first one was stop worrying about what other people have, yes. Right? Yes. That goes to what I was speaking to before of like, society says you need to have this or do this or whatever. That immediately is going to create anxiety, depression, the I'm not good enough, all the things that we have in our head, those narratives that we read in our head, right? If I were to worry about, people that are doing similar things to me that have 1 million followers or are making $10 million a year or whatever, I wouldn't make any progress because it seems unreachable. So I always say, stop worrying about what other people have, what other people do, what other people want. Just worry about what it is you want and what you feel it is that you are supposed to be doing in this world. And the rest will essentially take care of itself. But just being happy with what you have right now and being grateful for that. Because look, there are people who do nothing but try and get to the next level, And look, they do great, but they're just not happy when they get there because they think it's the next thing. And we have to be grateful for what we have because, the things that we have now, we probably wished for at one point. Mm-hmm. Right. And so just be grateful for that. Number 2 is find your purpose and live it daily. There's a lot of people who feel they have a greater purpose and a greater passion in life, but they feel stuck. They feel like they can't go live that because they're afraid of judgment, or they're afraid they'll fail, or even they're afraid of the success that might come from it, which is a whole nother conversation in itself. But there's individuals that don't live in their purpose because they feel stuck. And so what I always say is do one thing that gets you closer every day. Ask that question of, am I building my dream and my purpose, or am I building somebody else's? Did I do something today that gets me closer to living it 100% of the time? Sometimes living it daily might be, hey, I've got a couple minutes in the morning to live my life the way I want to. And so that's what I always say is like, just try and find a way to live in your purpose a little bit. Because there's things with my career that I've built, this business that I've built that I don't like doing. Like I'll be doing it. I'm like, this is not my purpose. What am I doing this? Right. And so, try and find some time every single day to live in that purpose. And the last one is stop worrying about the end result and live in the moment. And I love this one because going back to, again, the thought process of I need to get somewhere, right? There's a twofold thing to this, right? Like I have a big goal. I want to fill an arena one day for Growth Now Summit Live. I want an arena full of people from all over the world, so I can make an impact that great. If that was my only vision and I wasn't okay with small steps and small wins to get there, I would be paralyzed with fear. To be like, how can I ever do that? Like, how expensive that is to put that on? Like, who am I to think that I can fill this arena? And I just wouldn't take any action. And so that's the one thing about having big goals. It can paralyze you if you don't realize that you have to enjoy the process. I've also realized, both for myself and some of the amazing people that I've interviewed, is that the goal is important, right? It gives you that direction. So what I say a lot is, you can have a goal to make $1 million, and I champion you to go do that. Like I really do. I want you to go make that $1 million. But I promise you, when you get there, immediately you're going to go, how do I make 10 million? There's no fulfillment in the goal. Yeah, you might be able to do cool shit if you have $1 million, but there's no actual happiness and fulfillment in that moment. And one of the greatest stories, and I'll share this really quick, one of the greatest stories that came from my podcast when it came to this was a guy named Pete Evick. Pete Evick, he's the lead guitarist for Bret Michaels' band. And just a really, really good guy. He was on the podcast, and he shared a story about how his whole life growing up, number one, he was a Poison fan, and he ended up being Bret Michaels' lead guy. But number two, he wanted to play a sold out arena in his hometown, and this arena had like 30,000 seats. And so finally with Bret Michaels, he did this. They played the sold out arena in his hometown, and he walked off the stage and he never felt so empty. And that realization is because we tie so much emotion to our goals that when we get there, it's not as grand as we thought. And then we go, oh, what's next? Right. And honestly, like there's a lot of successful people that go into depression and sadness and even commit suicide because they thought that that goal was going to find them that fulfillment. And that's why I love talking to high performers about this, because they've spent their whole life chasing these things that aren't going to get them what they really want. And so that was really that last piece of like, have the goal, but be okay with the moment, right? Like this moment is all that matters. I could walk out of my office and drop dead. God forbid. I don't think I'm going to, but I could. And so I better enjoy this moment if it's my last.
Mm-hmm. And those 3 points, they stuck out at me because that's pretty much like what our focus is in our personal lives together as a family. And then in the podcast, right? It's, we're not always going to be happy. We're not always going to be in the best situation. There's going to be people that have way more than us and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, if you can just learn, I think, 38 and Brian's 39, we're at that point where it's like, everybody go ahead, do your thing. We're cool to stay in our lane. We know we'll get there eventually, right? But it's not at what expense. You can't go and stress yourself out or go and take out all this debt just because, right? Yeah. And then that whole purpose part, we talked about it on a podcast, that passion versus purpose, right? And even if you're not in that position that you want to be in and working and you're not that happy, you still got to find that purpose somewhere. So I really appreciate you saying that, of every day, just try to find that, right?
Yeah, no, and I love that you shared that. By the way, I'll be 37 on Friday. So
okay, I knew we were a little bit older.
Yeah, not far behind you guys. So I totally get it. But I have friends who have private jets. If I was worried about like what other people have, I would be frozen in that moment and just whatever, right? And so I realized that the fact that I'm living in my purpose, I'm making an impact wherever I can. I win every single day, right? I'm a big believer in ROI, and in business that usually means return on investment. But for me, it's return on impact. I know as long as I can serve the individuals who show up to listen, I will have a return in some way, shape, or form, whether that's from the inside or from the outside. That part doesn't matter, but there's always going to be some sort of return on the impact that I'm making. And that impact is my purpose, and that purpose brings me that happiness. And I think that's such a huge thing. And another thing that you said that was so smart was like, yeah, there's certain days that we're sad or angry or whatever. Most of my life, I thought that wasn't okay. To be sad or angry. I thought that I had to be happy all the time, or I was the worst person on the planet. And I actually had a coach at one point a number of years ago. She was a spiritual and relationship coach. And she's like, well, how are you feeling right now? I'm like, I'm angry. I use some coarse language, but for this, I'm angry, right? And she goes, you're allowed to be angry. You just can't be an a-hole.
Right.
And that was a massive shift in my life. It was the first time anybody gave me permission to be anything but happy. And then I realized that anger or sadness or whatever emotion is fleeting. So I better sit in that feeling, understand why, and then let it go. And then it's a lot easier to move forward to the next thing and find gratitude again and find happiness again and fulfillment. And so that was a huge shifting moment for me, was when I got that permission to just be whatever I'm feeling, right? Like we can be angry just as we are happy. Like it's okay. We're human beings. And that's what people need to realize.
Mm-hmm. I think too, even for kids, right? Like our 4 kids, it's the same thing we say. It's fine to be angry because, like you said, you don't want to shut that down. It's how do you react when you're angry? How do I react when I'm angry, right? So yeah. It's a big one because we live in a society where we're supposed to smile all the time, and when somebody asks you how you're doing, you're supposed to say good, even if you're in the middle of a pandemic and you lost your job and things are horrible at home. You're still supposed to say you're good, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
It's it's so true, and I love saying to people like, I'm fine, I'm okay. Throws them for a loop.
Yeah.
Like they get real uncomfortable, or you go, oh yeah, today's been a really rough day. They get so uncomfortable because they asked you expecting you to be like, I'm good.
Yeah.
And so like I have a friend, I won't mention who he is, but I have a friend who, how are you? Oh man, I'm doing great. I'm awesome. I'm wonderful. I'd always be like, are you really? There's never a person who's great, awesome, and wonderful all the time. Like, I don't care who you are. I don't care any of that stuff. There's not one person. And I'd always challenge him on that. He would still never let up. He thinks he's wonderful, which is fine. If you're going to walk through life like that, that's fine too. But it's one of those things, like, it's just very much a human thing. And I challenge people listening right now to, like, next time you're not doing fine and somebody asks you how you doing, don't say good. Like, tell them the truth and see where it goes. Either they're going to be uncomfortable and it'll make you feel a little bit better, or maybe they'll help you. Maybe they'll help you through that feeling and that emotion.
It's funny. I actually kind of did that as a social experiment a while ago at my old workplace, just to see what the reactions would be. It would be, yeah, how are you? It's been a pretty rough day. I just feel terrible today, because people just don't know how to respond to it. It was I wasn't even having a bad day. I just wanted to see what people's reactions would be.
Yeah, and this get real uncomfortable. It's so good.
Absolutely. But it's funny, or it's interesting, actually. The last point that you're making, you made me think of a lot of things there when we're talking about some of those self-doubt things. I said this to you earlier on. I wouldn't have reached out to you to be on the podcast, because I would have looked at you and said, okay, he's not going to have time for Disrupt the Everyday. It's just a small podcast. He's got a much larger audience. So, even though some of the best advice I got from my dad when he was alive was, he said to me, if you don't ask, the answer is always no. And, I've talked about that. I kind of try to live by that, but you still have those times where it creeps up and you have that self-doubt where, if I would have asked you and the answer was no, it would have just been no. Doesn't change my life really in any way. I'm glad we're able to have the conversation, that, you had reached out to us, because again, when I first saw you on, when I first saw you online, I was like, yeah, I'll move on to somebody who's maybe has a smaller audience who we have a better chance of getting on the show.
Actually, what you're saying is true, and I've had those moments. I don't have them as much anymore. Sometimes I do, right? Like, I read Matthew McConaughey's book, and he's somebody who's like, yeah, I shouldn't really reach out. Maybe he'll say no. Like, and so I haven't reached out. Maybe I should. Actually, I have a buddy who's had him on his podcast. But there are moments in my life where I get that, oh no, I shouldn't do it. Oh no. But here's the thing: when you're living in your purpose, it makes it a lot easier, because you're like, I'm here to serve at the highest level possible. And if it's to ask for a sponsor for my event, or ask for the client to pay me more money, or ask somebody to be on my podcast whose reach is way bigger than mine, it's all to serve a greater purpose, right? It's there to help people, and it's there to serve. And so when you think about that, it's a lot easier to take that action. It makes it a lot easier to say, okay, why not? Who knows? Who knows what they're going to say? I mean, I've had guests on my show where they say yes, and I'm like, holy crap, like, that's insane. Like, I can't believe that just happened, right? And it's such a quick yes. And it's because I approach them from a very real standpoint, and I say, this is what I'm trying to do, and I'm trying to make an impact, and I would love for you to help. A great example of this, by the way, is Ed Milet, who he came on the podcast pretty early on. I mean, I think he's actually right behind me. Episode number 106. I'm over 400 now. So he was episode 106. And he was somebody who first of all, he's worth $500 million. One of his best friends is Tony Robbins. His show is absolutely massive, reaching millions of people in a week, which is insane. So I reached out to him. He said yes. Not only did he say yes, he came on the show. We formed a bond. He ended up sharing that episode out to his email list of 1 million+ people. Wow. And honestly, it's because I asked. I didn't ask him to share it out in the email, because I didn't even know he had an email, to be honest. But like, I asked him to share it out, because I was like, this information is too powerful not to be heard. So would you be willing to share it out? And he did. And so you never know unless you ask. Now imagine, back then, that's a massive shift for my podcast, right? Way more eyes on it than I'd ever imagined in that very moment. And so those are the types of things that asking can do for you. And I think that's a huge thing.
Absolutely. Now, and just talking in terms of some of the people who you've spoken to, you've had the opportunity to speak to a lot of people, no matter how you define success, you have people hit those milestones, if you will. What are some of the common traits or characteristics that you see in the super successful people that you have the chance to speak with?
Yeah, I love this question. And you can tell that you've listened to my episodes on other people's shows. But I love this question, because this is literally the catalyst for all the success in my life. I was doing these interviews, and I wasn't having, the podcast was growing. It was great, but I wasn't having success in the other areas of my life. And I'm like, what's going on here? Like, I'm learning from all these people. I'm reading all the books. I'm doing all these things. And I realized that number one, I wasn't taking action. I was like, oh, I guess I should put this into play. Like, it's not just, oh, I'm learning this or whatever. But somebody had asked me, what's the common theme behind all of these successful people, just like you did? And I never thought about it before. Think about that. I at this point, I probably did over 200 episodes, and I never thought about what's the common theme. And somebody asked me, and I kind of stepped back and I looked, and I was like, okay, this is interesting. And so I ask every single person a 2-part question. First one is, what's your definition of success? Second part is, what are 3 things you do every single day to ensure that success for yourself? The answers are always different, but what I realized were those 3 things were there to serve them. It was to fill their cup up. So whether it was exercising or meditating or learning something new or whatever it was always there to serve them. And what it made me realize was I was pouring from an empty cup. I was trying to help all these people with my message and all these things, but I wasn't helping myself. I wasn't making sure that I was healthy, that I was well rested, that I was all these things. And so I started to instill things in my life daily that would change my life. And so I do 4 things that are non-negotiable every single day. One is I walk 3 miles every morning with my girlfriend. It's a good way for us to connect. Sometimes we don't talk at all, but we're still connecting. But sometimes it's like this morning was at like 6:15 in the morning, which it's a little early. But with that being said, we do it, right? 3 miles every morning. So it gets my body moving. We get to connect and plan our day, our week, or whatever. Second thing is I learn something new every single day. Growing up as such a terrible student, it's funny how much I take into consideration what I'm learning and what I'm absorbing now. And so I make sure I learn something new every single day. That's number 2. Number 3, I do some sort of visualization practice every day, whether that's in a meditative state or while I'm doing something. I have really, really strong visualization practices that tie my vision to my emotions, which makes it easier for me to take action towards those visions. And number 4, I reach out to somebody I care about every single day to check on them, just to make sure they're doing okay, making sure that they know I'm in their corner. And it's funny, a lot of people say to me, Justin, that 4th one sounds like you're doing it for other people and not for yourself. But it fills my soul up to know that I can be there for other people. And so that's what I make sure I do something every single day in that way to kind of touch somebody who means something to me.
I like that.
Did that answer your question? I hope.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, you answered my next question as well that I had formulating while you were talking, so that's perfect.
No, I like that part, that last one, right? Because that's almost one of those grounding tactics of, if you're still able to do that, you still know who you are, you're not too busy, you don't think too highly of yourself, right? So I think that one's neat.
Yeah. And what I found out with these daily habits, it's not some crazy routine. It's not something that kills 5 hours of my morning to make sure I get all of this stuff in. As a matter of fact, I can do them whenever. Like the walk happens in the morning because my girlfriend has 2 kids and we both work. And so it's just easier, but it could happen at any time. And so it's not about like waking up at 4 a.m., making sure we check the boxes. It's really stuff that fills my cup. And so what I say all the time is what's in my cup is for me, and what overflows is for somebody, it's for everybody else. And so I need to make sure that cup is full and prime, so I have more and more to give to the world. And so that's just the way that I do it. I think people get too caught up in rituals and routines, and then they get trapped in that, and then they have no time to do other things. Like the other thing is, 4 to 6 days a week, I have a second workout that I do as well. Like, so there's a lot that I cram into a day, including client calls and podcast interviews and all the other things. But those are the 4 absolutely non-negotiables. No matter how busy I am, I can get them done, and because they're easy, right? They're quick and easy, and they fill my soul, and I win every single day. Even if it's those 4 things I do, I win.
Absolutely. Now, I want to kind of ask you a bit of a weird question. I want you just to kind of, take everything in that you've learned over the last few years, just interviewing all these folks, running the events that you run. If you could go back 15 years and have a conversation with yourself, so 37-year-old Justin with 22-year-old Justin, what advice would you give him?
So as of today, I'm still 36. Let's not push it. Let's not push it to 21-year-old Justin. Let me think. It's a really good question. And it's actually one of the harder questions for me to answer, because I understand why everything happens, right? I understand that it all happens for a reason. But I wouldn't even say it's going to be okay, because I think the emotions that I even had through the thing, what would I say to 21-year-old Justin? I would say, it just keeps getting better. Whatever that means. And I'm going to keep it at that because it can be left up for interpretation. Mm-hmm. Right. So it just keeps getting better. To think about what I've been through from 21 till now, holy moly. Like when I was 21, I remember going and buying a slice of pizza and my credit card getting rejected. Like to think about like the progression from there till now is amazing just in life in general. So it just and I was still happy at 21, even though I couldn't buy that slice of pizza. So I would say it just keeps getting better. I think that's going to be the answer.
There you go.
Awesome. Now, Justin, what do you have on the go? What can we look forward to from you in the months to come?
Yeah, man, it's a great question. I mean, the next big thing, well, we have two things coming up, actually. October, we have a deep dive retreat that we do about focusing on the 4 pillars. And I actually co-host that with my girlfriend and my good friend, Adam. And we really deep dive into those 4 pillars that we talked about: business, spirituality, relationship, and what am I missing? Wellness. So we do all that. It's in New Orleans, actually, which we're super excited about. We rented 2 homes with a massive shared backyard and a pool. We have a couple spots left for that. If people are interested, they can reach out. And then my thing I'm super passionate about is my live events. So May 20th to the 22nd of 2022, Growth Now Summit Live finally returns. After a number of years hiatus. You guys can all guess why. Just 3 days of incredible human connection, incredible learning from some of the top thought leaders in the world. And I'm just really, really excited for us to all come together as one again and continue to build this community. And people, if people are interested, they can go to growthnowsummit.com, see the speakers that are announced so far as we have more coming up in the coming months. But growthnowsummit.com, grab your tickets now. And hopefully we get to all hang out. I think that would be incredible. Maybe the border opens up by then. You guys can be there. Who knows?
I know, right? Yeah, PA is not that far away.
It's not. Actually, people so Bruce came to my event in 2019. He drove down and he's right near you. So there you go.
Awesome. And what are the best ways to get in contact with you?
Yeah. So if they want to follow along with my podcast, they can, I already shared this earlier, but if they like what they heard in this interview, they can go search Growth Now Movement or even my name, it'll pop up. That's all there. And the best place I like to hang out is Instagram. So if you follow me at Justin T. Schenck, you can learn how to spell my last name in the description of the show, because otherwise you're going to get it wrong. So at Justin T. Schenck is my Instagram handle. Follow me there and connect with me there. I'd love to hear from you and see how I can support.
Great.
Awesome. Justin, thank you so much for taking the time today. We appreciate your time. And again, we appreciate the insights. I know there's everything that we wanted to ask you. We'd probably have to do a number of shows. So I'm glad we were able to hit on a lot of it today.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. I loved this conversation, and your smiles on the other side of the screen make me smile. So thank you guys so much. This was great.
Thank you, Justin.
Thanks for listening to the Disrupt the Everyday podcast. For more ways to listen, connect with us on social media. To be a guest or to partner with us, check out our link tree at Disrupt the Everyday. Join us next time for more ways to disrupt the everyday.